Damron Armstrong, the Black Repertory Theater of Kansas City, actor, producer, writer, janitor. Windsor, North Carolina, of all places. How did I make it to Kansas City? My father was drafted by the Chiefs in 1966. So the family moved here in 66? 69. Because I was 3. Yes. In 69, we moved to Kansas City so that he could play with the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, that does mean he was a part of the first Super Bowl team. So that's what brought the family to Kansas City. All the rest of my extended family are North Carolinians. My backyard was Swope Park.
Okay.
So Swope Parkway and 62nd Street.
Did you hear the lions roar?
No, but we could hear all of the concerts at Starlight. So that was a huge thing of going out on the back deck and listening to the concerts for free. The first performance I ever had, I went to, this is an old guy, brain fart, Blenheim Elementary School at 71st and Prospect. And we were doing a Thanksgiving concert for choir, and one of the guys got sick, one of the children got sick, and then I was on. 5 fat turkeys are we slept all night in the trees. When the butcher came around, we couldn't be found, so that's why you hear us sing. Still got it. I'm surrounded by siblings. My sibling, Darylyn, was a debutante. All the girls were debutantes. And so as a part of the debutante process, she performed this skit, I think it was entitled Scratch. It was about her dog dying. And the moment I saw her do that, it was a chorus line. I'm watching Cisco pitter pat and saying, I can do that. Yeah. It was like from that moment. When I came up, it was Walter Coppage, Danny Cox, and Bradshaw were the African American male leads in town. And because I was younger than those group of actors, as they got older, I would step into the younger African American roles, and it was Elroy Hawkins and I both came up at the same time. So it would be, Elroy would be doing a show at the Unicorn, so I'd do the show at the Coterie, and then flip-flop to that or to the American Heartland. And so it was the two of us sort of vying for roles in town. But at that time, I was still doing as much community theater as I possibly can. And it was like one of the best things about growing up in Kansas City is that there was so much community theater, and I wanted a taste of it all. So I was just on the circuit. And it wasn't until I was 17 that I got my first job at the American Heartland Theater, understudying Danny Cox in Ain't Misbehavin'. And he went on to do King Lear at then the Missouri Rep, and I stepped into his part, which would have been my first professional role in Kansas City.
Wow.
Yeah.
Danny Cox.
Danny Cox. Those are some big old shoes to fill, my friend. The one thing about growing up in Kansas City was we were sort of on the forefront of colorblind casting. And it's just so funny to have my life arc so much that we're now looking at #WeSeeYou White American Theater and what that kind of meant, living in that time period of being one of the first people I know who played Cinderella's prince and the wolf as a man of color. We were doing that well before it became like the national rage to do that. But to look back on it now was, at the time we were doing some really good work with colorblind casting, but what I think wasn't being addressed was African American stories and African Americans telling African American stories, as opposed to the major theater companies doing black shows in February. And that's really the reason that after 20 years, I moved back to Kansas City 6 years ago to start the Black Repertory Theater of Kansas City, because I thought it was important to sort of understand the contributions. I think racism and hatred comes out of ignorance of other people's contributions to your life. So if you don't know my contributions, you don't know my worth. And this whole experiment, I call, came out of the killing of Trayvon Martin, and how the media kind of made it a story about poor fashion choices. Be frightened of black young boys in hoodies. And then it became be afraid of all boys in hoodies, black or white. And so I think it was a whole miscarriage of justice that this poor young man was killed, and we lost sight of what the real issue in that was. And so that whole spin of the media made me think about how are our contributions being added to the conversation. And to fast forward to Black Lives Matter, what we have seen since Black Lives Matter is that a lot of legislation is now going out to sort of curb the critical race theory. If we sweep it under the rug, it doesn't really exist. And I've kind of been talking about this for the last 6 years, when McGraw-Hill was going to come out with a history book that says slavery didn't exist. So, you know, he who has the most money, because it all came out of a conversation with the Texas school district of what they wanted McGraw-Hill to put in to their history books, which was so bizarre, which is the argument now that you can't teach anything other than what's in a textbook to students, which is possibly the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Because the truth of the matter is, if we don't talk about our mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them. If we don't talk about America's genocide of indigenous Native Americans, then we're doomed to repeat that. If we don't talk about internment camps for Japanese that happen in this country, we're doomed to repeat that. So the best way to not make a mistake is to acknowledge the mistake and then move on from that. And that is the very crux of what the Black Rep is about. It's about telling stories that add to this stew that used to be America. Growing up, one of my favorite things was Saturday morning cartoons, The Great American Melting Pot, is that it took a little bit of everything to make this really rich stew that this country was originally based on, or the idea of what it was supposed to be. And we've gotten so far away from that. I mean, it's sort of the reason that you love enrichment festivals, that you get to go and you take in a different culture and you go, oh, that food is so amazing. Let's go to the Greek festival. I don't get to have that in my life all the time. What about that music? What about that tapestry? I want to be a part of that. And that's a part of my American existence. During the last 6 or so years of constantly being in the news, this man of color and this man of color have been shot down, have been shot in the back, have just really puts it in your face how fragile life is. Because when I came back here, and well, I lived in New York for 20 years. So a lot of my getting around town is by foot because I'm just so used to walking easily 50 blocks in New York and not even blink about it. But when all of that was really newsworthy, it sat on my consciousness that even though I founded a theater company, I've worked at every major theater in Kansas City, that the person who would attack me would know anything about that. And however it would be spun, there would be a segment of the population that would go, I don't know that he would have done anything that justified his death. But to the person who committed the atrocity, I'm just another person of color. The impact would be sort of the same conversations that I've had with several heads of theater over the years in Kansas City. How do you get black people to come to see shows here? Well, you can start by putting black people in plays. And so that's the impact that I've seen thus far, is African American audiences coming to shows and seeing their stories being told, seeing themselves on stage. We just finished doing The Wiz Jr. and with a student body from 4 years old to 23 years old. And their parents were just ecstatic. Finally, a program where I get to see my kids in brown faces on stage. Gary Holcomb is at the top of that list. Well, close to the top, if he's not the top. Yeah, he was so business savvy and just a good, all-around good guy who was then amazing on stage. And I was so young when I first met him. I think it might have been my second show at the American Heartland Theater, The Little Foxes. In the cast of this show, Gary Neal Johnson, Gary Holcomb, Mark Robbins, Merrill Moores, who played Birdie, Russell, Peggy Friesen. That was the cast of this show. And I think it was me and Karen Klein Wright were in that show together. But you talk about, it was a masterclass in acting before I even knew what a masterclass was. And then I think about, again, Danny Cox and Brad Shaw, who is this incredible Renaissance man. There was nothing Brad could not do. Props, got your props. Singer, got your singer. Dancer, got your dancer. I mean, you name it, this man could do it. He is a one-man traveling theater company embodied in one person. Like, Cynthia Levin stands out as one of my mentors and now dear friend. And to see our relationship kind of morph from you know, director and cast member to a friendship. When I reached out to folks and said, hey, I'm going to start a theater company, moving back to Kansas City, going to start this. She was right there by my side, guiding me both artistically, but certainly administratively, to tell me, how do you put this thing together? What do you, the steps that you need to take to have a successful theater company? And I think about my brother-sister team, that is Ronald McGee and Missy Coombs. The three of us came up together. As a matter of fact, one of them owes me $20. For the last 30 years, we have shared the same $20 between the three of us, and I'm not sure who has it right now. But to sort of have a mentor within this sort of brother-sister three-person thing that we've got going on, is great because anybody who knows Ron McGee is, if you talk about Brad Shaw being a Renaissance man, Ron McGee certainly is that as well, because there's nothing that he can't build or do, and to share a stage with him is always a moment where you go, oh my God, I have to stop watching him because I'm in the play too. And thankfully, a lot of those roles were at the Coterie, so that if I laughed out loud, it would just be, you're laughing at something funny, along with the kids. The thing that I'm most excited about is to see how we see white American theater is going to affect major theater companies in town. Certainly with regards to how are you diversifying your staff, how are you diversifying your boards, if you're going to take on any sort of minority productions, how are you heading those? Who's sitting at who's the team behind the table, whether that's lighting, sound, costume, certainly direction. So I'm excited to see, I'm excited to see, after having time alone to think about these things, what procedures you now have in place to put action behind the words that came out initially behind the statement being released. I call it One from the Vault. So we are going to do a remount of Passing Strange, which is this existential journey of a young African-American man that deals with direction, sexuality, and all the things that young men go through. But it's a really great script and really great music, because there's everything in it from punk rock to R&B. Everybody will be pleased by this show. And I'm excited because, due to the pandemic, Give Us Lemons will make limoncello. We'll be doing it at Thies Park, which is the south lawn of the Nelson, first 2 weekends in August. So hopefully, the heat has passed enough. But most of the shows that we'll do will be at sundown, so hopefully around the 8:30 hour, it'll be cooler than at noon on those dates. Were you in a show at the TY? I told you he was the man with the yellow hat!